Dear students and my teacher friends, Namaskar. I welcome you to the presentation lecture on cervical vertebra C3 to C7. Now, before I start my lecture, I would like to tell you few things about this lecture. That in this lecture I have included 9 theory points, and I have correlated this theory point with the figures. So the observing the figures is the main thing in this presentation lecture. Now before I start this presentation lecture, as you can see on the screen, I am showing you one table, and this table is a very good one. As you can see, we can easily compare the characteristic of the cervical vertebra, that is C3 to C7. Then we can compare the characteristic of cervical vertebra with the thoracic vertebra and with the lumbar vertebra. So this information is for you. You can do your preparation this way. I am not teaching this way, but this is for you. Okay, so you can go through this. And this is the figure. Okay, so now you carefully and closely observe these figures and try to remember all the names. Okay, so remembering the name is the main thing. Okay, so now I am starting this presentation lecture. This is the first point. Okay, so as you can read this, the first point is like this: the C1 and C7, they are talking about the bodies of the cervical vertebra, and this cervical vertebra, they are having smaller bodies when we are comparing to the rest of the vertebral bodies. Okay, for example, here as you can see these are the bodies. Okay, 1 minute. For example, these are the bodies of the cervical vertebra, and here you can see, for example, first thoracic vertebra. So the body of T1 is larger than the bodies of the cervical vertebra. Okay, now in the vertebral column I will show you. So as you can see over here, these are the C1 to C7, and these are the bodies of C1 to C7. And here you can see that this thoracic vertebrae, they are having the larger bodies than the cervical vertebra. So this is the first point of our discussion, and the only exception that we need to remember over here, that the body of cervical vertebra is larger than the body of coccyx. Okay, so this is the first point of our discussion in this lecture. Now we are moving on the second point. This cervical vertebrae, they are having larger vertebral arches. And what is vertebral arch? I have already described the vertebral arch in my previous lecture. That is the general characteristic or the parts of the typical vertebra. In that I have explained you about the vertebral arch. Okay, so you can go through that lecture. Now we are moving on to the third point of this presentation lecture. I am just scrolling down. Okay, so there are so many figures in this. It is taking time, but okay, so now this is the third point of our today's discussion, that the all cervical vertebra have three foramina. One vertebral foramina, for example, in the figure as you can see, this is the vertebral foramina. Okay, this one is the vertebral. So all cervical vertebra, they are having one vertebral foramina. Okay, and two transverse foramina. For example, this one is the transverse, this one, and this one. So as you can see, one vertebral foramina is there and two transverse foraminas are present in all cervical vertebrae. Now we are moving on the fourth point. This is the fourth point. Okay. Now in this point, the vertebral foramina of all cervical vertebra are the largest. For example, this one is the vertebral foramina of first vertebra. This one is the foramen of the second. Then here there will be third, then the fourth, then fifth. Okay, so all the vertebra, they are having larger foramina. Okay, that is the vertebral foramina is large. Now what is happening over here, that why this vertebral foramina is large? So you need to understand that the over here, this is the spinal canal. Okay, and inside this spinal canal, the spinal cord is present. So the spinal cord which is present in the neck region, that part of spinal cord is a broad one. So here, for example, here the spinal cord will be broad, and then it will be thinner one. Okay, in the rest of the vertebral column. So to house the spinal cord, this vertebral foramina are larger. Okay, in the first seven vertebra. So that is the meaning of this thing, why the vertebral foramina are larger in the cervical vertebra. Okay, so with this we have completed the fourth point of our discussion. Now I am moving on the fifth point. Okay, so here this one is the fifth point. Now each cervical transverse process contains transverse foramina. Okay, for example, this one is the transverse foramina, this one is the transverse foramina, and in the transverse foramina what is present? So sorry, this is the transverse process and this is the transverse process. So in each transverse process, as you can see, this is the transverse foramina is present. Over here also transverse foramina is present. Now in this transverse foramina, what is happening, that here you can understand, here there is here this is the spinal cord. Okay, so this spinal cord should be provided with the blood. Okay, so artery is reaching to spinal cord, then the veins are coming out. Okay, then then the spinal nerve is coming out. Okay, so all this thing, that is the blood vessels, artery, veins, and the nerves, they are traveling. Okay, from this transverse foramina. So this is the role the transverse foramina is playing. Okay, so with this we have completed the fifth point of our discussion. What is the role, how many transverse foramina are there, and what is the role of the transverse foramina? So now we are moving on the sixth point of our discussion. This is the sixth point. Okay, now in this point we are discussing the spinous process of C2 to 6 vertebra. So as you can see, this is the spinous process, okay, of C2 to C6 vertebra, and it is often termed as the, it is known as the bifid spinous process, because as you can see, the spinous process branch into two small projection at the tips. So here we can see this is the one projection, and here this is the another one projection at the tip, and that's why this spinous process is known as the bifid spinous process. So this point we are remembering this point. Okay, the spinous process of C2 to C6 vertebra is the bifid one. Okay, now we are moving on the seventh point. Okay, I am scrolling. Okay, one minute, it is taking time. Okay, this is the seventh point. Okay, first you observe the figure C3 C6. Okay, you observe this figure, observe this figure, all the names you try to remember. This is the anterior view, left hand side anterior view, and this one is also the anterior view. Okay, all the names you try to remember. Now I am discussing the seventh point. Okay, the third to sixth vertebra C3 C6 represented by the vertebra in the figure. Okay, so C3 to C6 they are shown in the figure, and the structural pattern they follow, this C3 and C6 vertebra, they are having the structural pattern of the typical vertebra. And now you know I have already delivered the lecture on the parts of the typical vertebra. So they are having C3 and C6 vertebra, they are having all the characteristic of the typical vertebra. That is the meaning of this point. Okay, now we are moving on the seventh point. Okay, then this is the seventh point, and we are discussing the seventh vertebra. The seventh vertebra is known as the vertebral prominence. You need to remember this name, vertebral the seventh cervical vertebra is known as the vertebra prominence, and it is having some different characteristic. So we can say seventh vertebra is somewhat different. Now, how this seventh vertebra differ from the rest of the cervical vertebra? So that point I am discussing with you. Okay, this is the eighth point of our discussion. Now this is the eighth point. Now the seventh vertebra, as I told you earlier, is known as the vertebral prominence, and this seventh vertebra is somewhat different. So how it differs from the rest of the cervical vertebra, that is the point. Okay, now the seventh vertebra is having, it has a large, okay, this vertebra, seventh vertebra, that is the vertebra prominence. This vertebra is having large non-bifid spinous process. Okay, once again, it is having large non-bifid spinous process, and that spinous process may be seen and felt at the base of the neck. Okay, I'm showing you this. For example, this one is the seventh cervical vertebra, and as you can see over here, this is the spinous process, and this spinous process is large one. Okay, and it is non bifid. The spinous process has not bifurcated. Okay, the spinous process is not having two small projection, so that's why it is non bifid. Okay, and the only difference is like that it is having a non-biped spinous process, that is the largest one, and otherwise the C7 vertebra is the typical vertebra. Okay, so once again, so we need to understand that the first two vertebra, C1 C2, that is the atlas and axis, they are atypical vertebra, unusual vertebra, and C3 to C7, they are typical vertebra. Okay, now you closely observe this figure. Okay, C3, try to remember all the name for C3, then try to remember all the name for the C4. Okay, then C4 anterior view, seventh cervical vertebra, this is the anterior view, and this one. Okay, remember all the name. Okay, prepare all the name. Okay, I'm showing you the entire lecture. So this, I have already shown you this. Okay, then the table. So I guess all the points I have discussed with you. With this, I have completed this presentation lecture on cervical vertebra C3 to C7. I hope this presentation lecture will help you in your exam preparation, and this will be helpful in your studies. My name is Manish Kosti sir. I am from Ahmedabad, India. Bye bye. Namaste.